The joint effort led by the two BRICS countries calls on WTO members to work together to ensure that intellectual property rights such as patents, industrial design, copyright and protection of undisclosed information do not create barriers to the timely access of affordable medical products to combat COVID-19. With support for this effort coming from the top.
To fight the pandemic, we need to pool all our resources, our capabilities, our knowledge and intellectual property. Another important step is to enable the transfer of medical technology for the duration of the pandemic.
But the WTO process has dragged on for almost 5 months already due to opposition from European countries, the United States and other developed nations that argue the waivers would stifle innovation by robbing pharmaceutical companies that make huge investments in research and development.
Some member countries are saying, mainly from developing countries, that the idea of the intellectual property constraint should be waived completely so that any members can manufacture. Others are saying, wait a minute, we invested a lot of money, or companies did. If you do that, there'll be no encouragement. And what I'm saying is, let's not spend, as we spend time in these arguments, people are dying, we are not getting the vaccines. There is a way, which is a compromise in the middle, which private sector companies are already doing. They are licensing companies in developing countries to produce and manufacture these vaccines and these drugs. Sherwin. And one of the biggest problems we have is just a sheer manufacturing constraint in the world.
There is evidence of collaboration within the private sector already. South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare is working with Johnson & Johnson to produce their yet-to-be-approved vaccine. AstraZeneca has licensed the Serum Institute of India, while similar agreements have been reached by pharma companies in Germany and elsewhere.
The pharmaceutical companies are doing it now, and we should encourage them. AstraZeneca licensed the Serum Institute of India to produce 1 billion doses, and it is licensing in other countries. It's licensing companies. I believe in Mexico, Thailand. It's looking for more and more places. Ditto with Johnson & Johnson was doing contract manufacturing, and now I understand they're willing to also do licenses, which transfers a lot more of the knowledge than you would have in contract manufacturing.
But despite this, the UN chief has slammed the inequity of vaccine distribution globally.
At this critical moment, vaccine equity is the biggest moral test before the global community. We must ensure that everybody, everywhere, can be vaccinated as soon as possible. Yet progress on vaccinations has been widely uneven and unfair. Just 10 countries have administered 75% of all COVID-19 vaccines. Meanwhile, more than 130 countries had not received a single dose.
Currently underway at the World Trade Organization.
Given this posture, we asked his spokesperson if the SG-backed efforts led by South Africa and India at the WTO.
Any move that will facilitate the distribution and access to vaccines will be welcome. Obviously, there are issues of rights and law that need to be respected, but the details of how that works out will be up to the WTO.
Richer countries argue that any intellectual property waivers should only be contemplated when current flexibilities within the WTO rules prove to be inadequate.
On the issue of vaccines, I have said that, the WTO rules, which talk about the TRIPS agreement, talks about intellectual property and how there can be flexibilities during a public health emergency to enable countries to manufacture medicines and make them very affordable, as South Africa did with the HIV/AIDS drugs. So right now, countries or members are talking about what do they do with these flexibilities in these times of urgency.
A lack of consensus at the WTO could be the swift death knell to efforts to remove blockages that could potentially speed up vaccine production and distribution around the world. Sherwin Bryceby's SABC News, New York.